All right, here we go. We're going to talk about ancient Sumer and the Sumerians, how they developed, and what that looked like for us. A little historical context to understand what's happening. So, again, you want to make sure you're trying to fill out those notes when you see things that relate to the vocabulary terms or some of the big ideas, the big questions, and we'll look at that here as we go. So, here's our timeline, right? We're at 7000 BCE. We have entered the Bronze Age and beyond. We notice that hunters and herders start to settle in Mesopotamia. In 3000 BCE, about 4,000 years later, Sumer is organized into city-states, which had their own governments. They came down from the Zagros Mountains to find some water, and that's where we see the development of those city-states. We'll start talking about some of these other pieces later on, like Sargon, who united Akkad and Sumer to form the first empire, King Hammurabi conquering the Amorite cities, creating the Babylonian Empire, the Assyrians using their powerful military to conquer Mesopotamia, and the Chaldeans, who defeated the Assyrians. King Nabopolassar formed the Chaldean Empire. We'll get into some of that later, but let's talk about the ancient Sumerians. So here we are, Mesopotamia, also known as the Fertile Crescent, the land between two rivers. You see the Tigris River and the Euphrates rivers and their tributaries. That is the area we're talking about, known as the Fertile Crescent. So Mesopotamia, that's exactly what it means, the land between rivers. In Greek, Mesopotamia was located in what is present-day Iraq on the plain between those two rivers. The rivers flow southeast from the mountains into the Persian Gulf. We know this as the Fertile Crescent. It is known for its rich farmland, which fertile means that it can grow things easily. It includes parts of what is now Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Lebanon, Israel, and Jordan, so a big part of the Middle East. And then about 7000 BCE, hunters and herders settled in Mesopotamia. By 4000 BCE, some of them moved to the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley. They built farming villages along the rivers. Makes sense. They need rivers to grow things and to survive. So let's talk about the farming. They depended on these two rivers for the water to go into their fields. They weren't very reliable. In the summer, it was very dry. Little or no rain fell. Then rains and snowmelt in the mountains caused the rivers to flood in the spring. So the changing of the season brought a very different aspects to this area. Although floods could destroy homes and crops, they also deposited rich silt, which are the fine particles of fertile soil on the banks and plains. People learned how to control the floods with dams and irrigation. Remember, irrigation is a system that supplies dry land with water through ditches, pipes, and streams. This also allows people to grow a surplus of food. This is extra food to allow people to develop specific skills. Some people became artisans, making weavings, pottery, tools, and weapons. Some people began to trade those goods in these villages because of all of these things grew into cities. So here is Sumer. It is closer to the Persian Gulf. A little bit southeast in this region, around 3000 BCE, several cities developed here. Uruk, Eridu, and the first city were really the first cities in Southwest Asia. These cities were surrounded by mudflats and desert. It was difficult to travel by land and communicate with others. This caused each city to be independent. So it was like they were their own country in a sense. So here we have our city-states. You see a nice picture there and a wall from Sumer, something that was a piece of art back then. Each city in Sumer raised their own crops and made their own goods. The cities gained political and economic control over the surrounding land, forming city-states. A city-state is an independent nation made up of a city and the land around it. The city-states were independent and had their own government. Each city-state had a population roughly between 5,000 and 20,000 people, very large for the time. Historians believe that each Sumerian city-state was protected by a large city wall. The area had few trees or stones, so Sumerians used mud from the rivers to build. They mixed the mud with crushed reeds, then formed them into bricks and dried them in the sun. City-states often went to war with each other over land and resources. During times of peace, they traded with each other and formed alliances. So things would shift from time to time. Now we get into the word polytheism. You're going to notice this picture here on the left is an ancient ziggurat, and we'll find out what that means and what polytheism means. So here we go. So Sumerians were polytheists. Polytheism is the belief that there are a lot of gods. They believed gods controlled nature and guided people. People honored whichever god would help their activity. So this was their religion. Each city-state claimed a god for its own. In each city, a ziggurat was built to honor this god. A ziggurat, you ask, is a large pyramid-shaped structure with a temple at the top. The temple was the god's home, and only special priests were allowed to go there. So this was their temple, this was their synagogue, this was their church, this was their mosque. At first, priests were the ones ruling the city-states, but they later became monarchies. Sumerian kings claimed the gods gave them power to rule. So this is where we start to see people saying they had the divine mandate that God told them to be king. So let's look how society was set up in the social groups. So a class system. So you were basically born into a particular social group. The upper class consisted of kings, priests, warriors, and government officials. The middle class were merchants, farmers, fishers, and artisans. This was the largest group. Normal folks. The lowest class were people that were enslaved, most of whom had been captured in wars. Criminals and debtors were also in this class. These people worked for the upper class. And now let's look at gender roles. Men were the head of the family. They went to school and trained for a specific job. Women, they ran the home. They taught their daughters, who took care of the children. Women had few civil rights, although some owned businesses. But the law required parents to take care of their children. Also, adult children also had to take care of their parents. So you kind of see the social structures that were set in place, particularly surrounding gender here during this time period. Let's talk about the economy, all things bought and sold. Most Sumerians were farmers and had a plot of land that was around the city-state. They grew wheat, barley, and dates, which is kind of a type of fruit. Sumerians also raised sheep, goats, and pigs. Trade was important because Sumerians needed to trade for raw materials and goods they did not have. Trade routes linked Sumer to India and Egypt. They traded wheat, barley, and tools for things like timber and minerals and metals. They also traded for the gemstones, carnelian and lapis lazuli. Sumerians used the minerals and metals to make jewelry and tools, and you see some of the examples here to the left. So let's talk about their form of writing, which developed during this time. So Sumerians developed the earliest known writing system. They used cuneiform, a system of writing that used wedge-shaped marks made in soft clay. Cuneiform had 1,200 characters as compared with the English alphabet, which has 26. Each one represented a name, object, or number. Sumerians wrote on clay tablets because they did not have paper. They wrote using sharp reeds, which is a type of plant. Only a few people learned to read, mostly boys from wealthy families. After years of training, they became scribes, or people that wrote things down. A scribe was a person who copied or wrote out documents. They wrote records and contracts. Scribes also recorded stories. The oldest known story is the Epic of Gilgamesh. An epic is a long poem that tells the story of a hero. Gilgamesh was a king of the Mesopotamian city of Uruk. So here's a couple of other advancements that came along during this time period. We see in their technology, they were the first people to use the wheel. It happened. They built carts, which were pulled by donkeys. They also built chariots. Sumerians also made sailboats, wooden plows, and the potter's wheel. They developed bronze, which made stronger tools and weapons. It was also used for jewelry. Math. Sumerians used geometry to measure the size of fields and plan buildings. They also created a place value system based on 60, We got the concepts of a 60-minute hour and minute from the Sumerians. And then astronomy. The position of the stars was used to plant crops and hold religious ceremonies. Sumerians also developed a 12-month calendar based on the lunar or moon cycle. These are some of the sources that we use for these. We want to make sure that we cite those. But otherwise, hopefully you got some of that information. You got your vocab. You were able to answer the questions. Remember, pause, go back if necessary, or otherwise just simply ask your teacher. All right.